Hello, hello, and welcome back to Qredible Live. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, somebody who truly embodies leadership, strategy, and innovation in the world of human resources and talent management. So, Michelle Whitmore is a dynamic and accomplished HR leader with a wealth of experience in people operations, talent acquisition, and administrative management. With an impressive career spanning top companies like Sega of America, Comcast, who we all like to pay every month, and Canna Advisors, she has built a reputation as a hands-on, results-driven professional who truly understands how to cultivate strong teams and drive operational and organizational success. So currently, she's a founding partner at H2 Talent and a consultant at Higher Standards People Operations. So Michelle helps emerging and high growth companies optimize their HR strategies and brings a blend of expertise in change management, leadership, and operational efficiency. Beyond her professional achievements, she actively contributes to the industry as a Human Resources Committee member for the National Cannabis Industry Association, shaping best practices in this very rapidly evolving space, as we all know. So we are thrilled to have Michelle join us here today and to share her insights on the future of work, leadership, resilience, and the evolving landscape of human resources. So, Michelle, welcome to Qredible Live. Great to have you.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. And wow, thank you for that incredible introduction. That was amazing.
Well, you're amazing. So it's great to have you. It's interesting, when we first met, we were talking about sort of IT resources in the industry, and we're going to get into that. But I want you to sort of share your personal journey. How did you end up in this space, in this particular industry?
Yeah, so around 8 years ago, my husband and I moved to the Boulder area from California. And honestly, I'd been working in high tech and video games for so long, started looking at positions, and honestly was really bored with the conversations that I was having. And I was in Colorado, and I have always been an enthusiastic supporter of cannabis. And I figured while in Rome, right? Made it my mission to get my first position in cannabis, which was, as you mentioned, at Canna Advisors. And my very first recruitment placement there was a marketing specialist who had recently relocated from South Carolina to Colorado in order to obtain access to cannabis for her husband, who was a war vet out of Afghanistan. He lost his legs. He had a traumatic brain injury from an IED, and what we refer to as a medical refugee, right? She moved here to get access because he was on 36 plus pharmaceutical pills on a daily basis.
Wow.
And I know, right? That's crazy. And it was just such a meaningful process to me to hear her story and to understand that there were so many other people like her. And it was so meaningful to be able to extend her a job offer and, have her working alongside me. And honestly, I've just been hooked on the industry since then.
That's awesome. And it's interesting. So you're a fairly new entrant, I guess what you said 8 years ago, right?
8 years, yep.
Okay. So it's probably about the same for me when I started and entered into this industry and learning about it. And the other day, it was interesting. I was looking at LinkedIn and I saw a post from, one of the legacy operators and said, "Hey, I've been in this industry for 20 years. And it's sad to see all these new people coming into the industry, like they own it and they understand everything about it." And, I've never claimed to understand everything about it, but I've learned a lot in the last 8 years. But it was interesting because it sort of highlights what we're talking about, and that there's sort of, and it's not the case in every legacy operator, because I know a lot of legacy operators and they don't all feel that way, but there's a perception a bit, and particularly as they look at, some recent outsiders coming in, that, there's kind of a cultural and, sort of rub, if you will. So legacy operators often view themselves as the guardians of the cannabis culture, right?
Right.
And, and having been part of the industry long before legalization, they feel that outsiders may not fully appreciate the cultural heritage or the sacrifices that, they've had to make. And by the way, nobody disputes that. They've been there all along, but it's sort of important to have an outside perspective, particularly with what I call the investor influence, right? So
Yeah.
the cannabis industry has seen lots of investment from outside. And I know that a lot of these investors are looking for experts in HR and experts in accounting and marketing and compliance and payroll and financial planning and you name it. So how do we bridge this gap? I mean, what kind of things can we do? Because you're recruiting people from both inside and outside the industry for the industry, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's interesting your introduction to this topic. When I very first joined cannabis, I heard it not so lovingly referred to as roots versus suits, um, and the truth is, both sides are needed for success in cannabis. Cannabis organizations. Need to understand the cannabis community and honor decades of experience in working with the plant. And for a company to be successful, it needs to be built upon sound business principles and decision making.
Right. And it's interesting you said suits because when I first started going to the conferences,
Mhm.
you didn't see a lot of suits. But now you're seeing more sport coats and suits and, a different element. So it's very clear that, we're seeing, sort of this melding of the legacy world and, and the outside world because let's put it this way. I mean, the industry is legitimizing.
Mhm. It
And
is.
as it is, there's gonna have to be some change, right? So we gotta bridge that gap.
Yeah, I would say that, gosh, I think with 2 weeks into working at Canna Advisors, I went to my first MJ BizCon, which, as you can imagine, was an extremely overwhelming, experience.
I know.
Um, I mean, it's still overwhelming, just in a slightly different way, right? The sheer size of it. But yeah, since I've been attending, conferences and seminars and things in the space for the last 8 years, the level of professionalism has just been growing exponentially. I no longer, I very rarely see people dressed up in cosplay anymore, like the Dude or anything like that. There's, actual business attire and there's business being conducted. It's been an interesting, thing to watch.
Yeah, and particularly, like, as this industry is bringing in more outside capital and by the way, I really believe that as the industry continues to evolve and as we deschedule or reschedule, hopefully sometime in the near future, we're going to see more professional investors coming
Mhm.
into the industry. And as
Yeah.
that happens, I mean, there's going to be a significant requirement for professional financial management. Not that these operators don't do that, but it's not their level of expertise, right? So,
Yeah,
so
I'd say that a lot of operators, they've got some familiarity with basic financial reporting. But truly being able to understand the cash flow, the budgeting process, and financial forecasting can be challenging for those without true business backgrounds. And then, of course, all of those pieces dovetail and contribute into long term business strategy and growth planning, which can be unfamiliar territory for those who are, largely plant touching.
yeah, and so I mean, are you like putting in like accounting, HR, and marketing, like kind of all over the place, or what are the?
Yeah. I think we do a really balanced mix of plant touching positions as well as sales, marketing, and those back office operations. And then,
Mhm.
of course, one of the core competencies has been placing salespeople because as companies are ready to grow and expand, that's an area of investment in which they feel is going to generate, a pretty immediate ROI for them.
Yeah, and not to put you on the spot, but is there like a percentage of folks that you're pulling from the industry versus outside the industry, or is it pretty mixed?
That's an interesting question. I would say that it is probably 60 to 70% from within the industry, right?
Okay.
Reaching out to folks that may not know that a particular opportunity was available if we weren't passively, reaching out to them because maybe they're not an active job seeker. And then for those operational positions, it really, we can really draw from either space. We love pulling people from wine and spirits. We love pulling people from other highly regulated industries like oil and gas.
Hmm. That's interesting. So, 30, 40% coming from outside the industry. But, now that the industry has grown, has been maturing, it's
Mhm.
that you could probably find more people within the industry, but it had to be harder 8 years ago, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that's when we were definitely pulling mostly from oil and gas for manufacturing positions. Um, yeah, it's the conversation has really changed, right? Back when I would be interviewing, screening candidates for administrative roles or HR, we'd have to be really, really careful. And a lot of times, too, depending on the industry they were coming from, I would actually pose the question, right? How do you feel that a cannabis position on your resume is going to look, right? How does this fit into your overall, idea of your career trajectory? Especially if they were coming from a very conservative industry like healthcare or banking, right? If this position doesn't work out, do you feel you're going to be able to step back in and utilize your industry expertise in a new role? And I would honestly tell these people to go have conversations with their important people, maybe sleep on it, really, truly have a thoughtful discussion about how this fits in with what they might like to do down the road. And I would say early on, the people would mostly come back and say, yeah, this probably isn't the right next step for me. That has gotten less and less as time has gone on. And now, I can't even be bothered to talk with people who use hushed tones to say cannabis or marijuana, right? There's no place for that.
Right, because there's gotta be, some trust in the integration process, right? So, because there's differences. I mean, there's clear differences between the industry. It was interesting. I was constantly in a suit, in my previous financial services, industry, and, now I'm what I call cannabis casual, and I think it's great, right? I think it's one of the positive things, but I've noticed, like, just things, communication styles, work practices was very different in the industry, and sort of, risk tolerance. I come from a very highly regulated industry, and so I know that there was sort of things I needed to get used to when I came to this
Mhm.
industry, and I needed to understand, and I certainly needed to understand the perspective of legacy operators and learn from them, because there's some, brilliant, folks out there that know this industry, and that's really who I've learned it from. A lot of those legacy, operators, but there's sort of trust in the integration. Given those differences, I think building trust between the legacy cannabis experts and more traditional business professionals, that are coming from the outside, is kind of critical. So, have you seen that, or have you had any feedback from some of the folks you've placed that have talked about that?
Yeah, and I'll also go back to, what you said at the opening of this conversation, right? That some of the cannabis experts today are, feeling that it's a shame, right, to bring in so many outside folks.
Mhm.
I think that they're wary of corporate involvement, because, this whole industry has a history of criminalization. And honestly, there is still a stigma that remains today, although, it's lessened considerably since I first joined the industry 8 years ago. And on the other side, the business professionals, really need to recognize and respect the deep industry knowledge that legacy operators have. Some of these people have been touching the plant for, decades, even, right, in home grows, or operating their own businesses. And when I have conversations with people in agriculture, sometimes they're very dismissive of these things and believe that growing cannabis is just, isn't any different than growing strawberries or ornamental flowers. And
Mhm.
at best, I think they're missing a lot of the nuances of growing cannabis. And at worst, they sound dismissive of our industry expertise.
Yeah, and it's interesting because one of the areas that I saw was somewhat, lacking, was technology adoption,
Mhm.
right? When you're and I'm not talking about sort of the plant type technology. I'm talking about the administrative and compliance based, technologies and business process type technology. And that's sort of how you and I met. We were talking about, technology people in the industry, and I asked you, how many, technology placements have you done recently? And really not a lot, right? Because you're not really
No,
seeing a
no.
lot of tech
Not
folks.
a lot, but again, H2 Talent has created a niche, right, within cannabis, hemp, and psychedelics. IT or software development, even if it is specific to our industry, there are there's an entire recruitment industry built around serving that segment.
Yeah, because I mean, from an operational perspective, obviously everybody's got to be dealing with standard operating procedures and compliance routines,
Mhm.
and those things are a lot easier when they're built into the technology, which is
Absolutely.
obviously what our company does. And I think that there's sort of they have to adopt and adapt, to this changing compliance world. So when you and I were talking about it, I think we both felt that we're going to see a change in that area. We're going to see more and more scaling from an operations and technology perspective, within the industry. And I think that's definitely going to happen,
Mhm.
as we see more investment outside capital coming in, because, quite frankly, it's getting harder to make money in the industry. You
It
know,
is, it is. And I think you can probably speak to this, much better than I can possibly do. But I don't think that cannabis companies are leveraging the technical, tools that they have at hand. Um, Integrating automated improvements that drive greater efficiency, and the people who are used to doing this within other industries can bring a terrific outside perspective in, to help them accomplish those goals.
right. And I think that, so, I'm seeing a lot of changes in that area. And next week, we are actually, week after next, we have Jeff Wise coming on from Newbold Advisors, and it's
Mhm.
sort of, he introduced us, which
Yeah.
was interesting. But they see, and they're helping cannabis companies sort of understand the digital transformation and the mandate for reducing costs and reducing risk through that automation, because the only way to scale these businesses is to not be throwing bodies at it all the time,
Right.
and the only way to stay in compliance is through tech. So we're going to have a real interesting conversation on that in a couple weeks with the Newbold folks. But back to sort of bringing a business person into cannabis,
Mhm.
what are some of your thoughts there, and about how companies can make that happen successfully?
Yeah, I think it starts with the realization that transferable talent from outside industries is a really great way to bring formal business acumen into your organization, but only if you do so by selecting for the right mindset, right, for that successful transition. Because not every personality or background is going to transition well. To be successful in cannabis really requires an entrepreneurial mindset, as well as the ability to make decisions despite ambiguity. So again, emphasizing the need for a tolerance of risk and uncertainty, which we've already touched upon.
Mhm.
For lack of a better way to put it, I'm also going to say that there's a hustle mentality, right, that helps people thrive in a chaotic startup environment, because after all, this entire industry is still a startup. And then maybe this is a personal prejudice. It's definitely not a concrete rule, but I tend to be a little bit wary of business people with backgrounds that are exclusively in large companies, because I think they're going to have the hardest time transitioning. They're used to having so many resources available to help meet their objectives. They get frustrated by the fact that we have to recreate all the tools that other businesses take for granted, like banking and payroll services. And it also seems like the larger the company, the more time consuming and complex it is to navigate approvals and enact change. And someone used to this might find it difficult, if not impossible, to settle in and thrive within the frantic pace of our industry.
Yeah, well, you said it, because you said this is somewhat of a startup type environment in
Mhm.
these companies, because it's such a nascent industry. And it's interesting, because I find that myself. I built many startup companies, and it's a rare person that can come from a large company and sort of be in this situation where they have to wear multiple hats. They have to do things that they're used to having big staffs to do, right?
Right.
And they have a
Well, and
lot of,
big budgets, right, to
yeah,
go along with it.
big budgets. And it's interesting. I've had great success. Our chief information officer, who's a real blessing to us, Ronaldo Montman, he had 1,000 people in his organization, huge budget in the healthcare industry. And he's an anomaly because he rolls up his sleeves. He's been able to wear many hats. He's been able to get a lot of stuff done. But you're right, that's kind of rare.
That is
So
the exception.
that is the
Yeah,
exception.
for instance, we'll recruit for pharmacists in charge, or product development chemists and things along those lines, and we'll get a lot of interest from people in pharma. But I've learned that my very first question is, what are your salary expectations stepping into the cannabis industry? Because they're currently, in the 400s, with a lot of benefits and perks, and good for them. But that's not going to be their experience in making the step to our industry.
Right, but there's got to be some good strategies for these companies to sort of integrate and balance the legacy cannabis expertise, which is invaluable. I
Mhm.
mean, they have so much to share about the industry, and I don't think they should ever assume that people coming from outside the industry don't want to hear it. They do want to hear it. They need to hear it. They need to understand and appreciate the history, but truly, the roots, as you called it, of the industry. So when the roots meets the suits, that we could really, make a good transition. But there's got to be some successful strategies to sort of blend those. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I definitely think that there are some things that companies can consider, right, in order to balance that legacy expertise with business acumen. Cross training programs are the first thing that comes to mind, right? Developing initiatives that are going to share knowledge between the two. As well as mentorship programs, right? Pairing a legacy cannabis expert with a business mentor elevates both of them, right? There's an exchange of knowledge there that hopefully develops into an appreciation and a respect for where each side has been. And then I think, in terms of, how do you structure, your decision making within your business to complement, these two, is to make that decision making really collaborative, right? Implementing processes that involve both the experts within cannabis, as well as the business professionals in key decisions, as well as making sure that the roles and responsibilities are clear, right? This works best when you're able to define areas where each group's expertise takes precedent in order to minimize conflicts.
So, cross training programs, mentorship, partnerships, and by the way, one of the things that I'm a big believer in is what I call reverse mentoring, right? Which is, from my perspective, it's about the older people and the younger people in the firm can learn from each other,
Mhm.
right? And it's the same thing with the people who have the cannabis experience and the ones who don't can learn from each other if they're open to doing that. So to me, it's a two-way mentorship, where you're pairing that legacy expert with business mentors and vice versa, because the business people have to understand the industry. If they don't understand the industry, they'll take it for granted and they'll try to apply things from the oil and gas industry that just don't make sense. So
Right.
that mentorship partnership is a two-way street. I love that. And then, making an investment in cannabis experts, that. So I think that one of the things is that the industry has sort of been lacking in education. And
Mhm.
and I think it's really, really important to have some type of training on the industry, but also sort of the formal business structure. I got to imagine there's big opportunity there to sort of see this is sort of the operating environment that could make a lot of sense. So,
Yeah, and absolutely. Another piece, could be making an investment in your current cannabis experts, right? If you have employees that are interested in pursuing formal business training,
mhm.
support them in that initiative, right? Maybe allow them a schedule that accommodates, going to classes. Maybe provide a tuition reimbursement program.
Yeah, that's great. And what I mean, I the other thing that's got to be a big change is the culture. The culture of these companies have got to be very different than a stodgy, oil and gas or healthcare or pharmaceutical company. I wonder how, we could bridge the gap there. Any thoughts on that?
You know, very early on, when I was recruiting for an office manager / executive assistant for Canna Advisors, I was going through all of the various, screening questions. And if we got to, if the person was promising, I would get to the point where I would start introducing, some of the cultural differences, right? This is a very different work environment than you're used to at XYZ. We're very casual around here, right? Not only do we have a lot of industry jargon, but I'm going to venture to say that this is most people's safe place to swear, mine included, right? Is that something that's going to be uncomfortable, right? It's not directed at anyone. It's more like punctuation, right? It's emphasis. And, just really having to kind of draw out some of those things, introducing our Friday happy hours, which were consumption based, and just, making sure, we're not expecting or requiring that anyone participate in this, but it's there. And is that something, how does that feel, as you try things on? So, and kind of think about, working with us. And so, really just trying to paint them a realistic picture of, how this might differ from their current office setting.
That's interesting. Have you had anybody like turn around and walk out the door and say, forget this?
No, not over the swearing or the happy hours, thankfully. Those were the easy ones.
Oh, that's interesting. And I do see that tech spending is increasing, and one of the things that we're seeing is if you look at sort of the technology market growth in the cannabis industry, there is a lot of forecast for that to grow significantly, like almost 30% per year.
Mhm.
So we're seeing a lot more investments in advanced analytics, AI driven solutions, et cetera. And, so I predict that you're going to be seeing more technology placements in the future.
I would love you to be right on that.
Well, let's see. I'm not putting any money down on it right now, but it helps me if it does. And, of course I follow
Well,
all
and
these
it helps
companies.
us and it helps those companies too.
Yeah, and it will help Newbold, who we'll be seeing
Mhm.
in a couple weeks. So, and
Absolutely.
they're doing great work. And one of the things that I think is going to open up those investments is, if we can just get rid of 280E, with the and let these companies have a chance to really, operate as a regular
Mhm.
business. It's just a shame to see how taxed they are, and how they're really starting with an arm, behind their back and a leg tied up, and they're asked to hop through traffic and make these profits. So
Mhm.
I'm hoping, and I pray for this industry that these changes can happen, so these good businesses that are been operating can spend more money on compliance and technology and the kind of things that it's tough for them to spend on now. So, Michelle, why don't you tell our audience how folks can get in touch with you if they're looking for the right staffing for their organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I am always on LinkedIn, or you can find me at my website, h2talent.com.
Excellent. And again, I just want to promote, and I think we have off next week. So we have an off week next week for travel, but the following week, we're going to have Jeff Wise. Jeff is, interestingly enough, Jeff's from an organization, Newbold Advisors, that I used to work with in my last industry. They've been in this industry now, and they're doing great work. And what they're really going to be talking about is how technology will be growing in this industry, how it is important today.
Mhm.
And they've worked with us and are working with us to do basically look at assessments. How well are you prepared for the future and the changes that are coming up, and how can you digitally optimize your business? So, and if all that happens, which it is starting to happen, then Michelle, there you go. You'll have some placements in technology, which is great. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a very important topic, and we will see everybody on the 28th, Qredible Live with our friend Jeff Wise at Newbold Advisors. Have a great weekend, everybody.